In case you missed the last video, we got the concrete footings poured and built the girders, and now we can move on to getting the floor system framed. First though, we needed to pick up the lumber for the floor system framing, and this ended up turning into a bit of a saga of its own.
I'm en route to go get Johnny or help him or something. He went to Home Depot, loaded his truck with way more stuff than is supposed to go in a half-ton Chevy, like way more, we're gonna see in a second. And then, guess what? The thing is dead, like won't even start. And he calls me pretty upset about it because he spent all morning just loading the truck and now it's dead, loaded in the parking lot. We're gonna go see if we can help him out. Let's see, Chevy truck, there he is. Wow! So the truck won't start, but let's start with something else, because, I mean, what? This truck is freaking flattened. That's impressive. That's
ambitious, man.
That's as good a job as I've ever done trying to destroy a truck right there.
So 2 trips.
Yeah.
There's something going on with the electronics on my truck. I've already had it worked on, but I can't take it to the shop because this is what we're using to move materials.
Let's see, it might be the radiator cap. Where's that? You want to check that first? Yeah. All right, now we can get to work. That's how the pros do it. Let's check out Johnny's tailgate, because that was more of a load than I've ever seen on any regular truck. It did do a little damage here, kind of squished it there. And otherwise though, it's shuts, so that's good. But that's too bad. Ford, it did okay, but I had had non-pressure treated wood, 12 footers, so that was a lot lighter. So luckily my tailgate is still intact. There's our delivery.
After finally getting the lumber unloaded back at the house, we could work on marking out our layout for the floor joist locations, and we ran into another slowdown here.
We're gonna look at the plans here because we're gonna do layout for the floor. And one of the things that you usually check for is that none of the toilets land directly on a joist, because they would have to cut the joist, or you have to move the joist or header in a spot for them to have an opening for the toilet. So we're gonna look at that. Say that's your joist layout, and say your toilet flange is there. What you can do is 2 things. Either you can shift this, over, or you can just header between these 2 joists.
I see, and cut out that joist section.
Cut out this and let it extend on, and then double these 2 so that they're helping carry the load. So we do that a lot though, where you don't want to mess up your layout.
Once we confirmed the toilet location would work with unmodified joists, we could move on to marking the layout, and Eric had a few tips here as well.
So we're gonna pull layout finally on this beam for the floor system, and it's gonna be 2-foot layout, 2 foot on center. What I want to say is that the reason for layout for the most part is for uniform strength. Secondly, it's so that your sheet goods break on the center of your framing members. Sheet goods are either 4 foot or 8 foot. When we're doing this, we'll hook on the end, and then for our 2 foot dimensions, you mark 3/4 either side of your 2 foot increment. That way your sheet good will actually break on the center of it, and the end of your sheet goods will have bearing wherever you break them. So that's super important. That's why we don't do like 2 foot set ahead or 2 foot set back. We actually center it on the foot increments like that. So if you're using a shorter tape, like a 25 foot, and you want to do the whole layout with that instead of a long tape, you're gonna run out of tape before you run out of beam. So one mistake I've seen is people take their last layout that they marked and put their tape back there and stop marking again. But really you're gonna be 3/4 off a layout if you do that. Don't have the center marked. So what I'll usually do is just to put this back, my 2 foot increment is centered like that, and then just keep marking like I was down the line.
Once the layout was marked on both girders, we could finally get some boards moved back to the site, get them cut to length, and then start getting the joists set in place on the girders.
So we're gonna set our first joist, 2x12, and a couple things we're gonna do before we set all of them is flip it up and sight down. We're looking for crown, like this way. And we're gonna set them all with the crown up so that the floor doesn't do that. So this is crowned up this way, put them all the same or you will hate the floor later.
Kind of see if these are the same.
Oh, I got you.
pretty much 1.75 inches light.
Yeah. We're gonna attach this little piece of block so that when we toenail or toe screw this edge one in, it doesn't like drive it over as we hit it, because we want it to be perfectly flush. So what I usually do is just tag something like this. That'll hold it, hit it with a nailer, and it doesn't really move. Then you can just take your little block up, do it again.
There you
1,000 times.
Now, do you think putting that little hole structurally damaged that beam?
We'll caulk it later.
I think that probably ruined the building. That was the angle right there.
You want to nail from this side, you gotta do a custom nail so that it goes straight down instead of popping out. But it usually works. Didn't work. Popped out. Pro tip, didn't work.
That.
Oh, let's see the grain.
That old rift sawn right there.
Yeah, so the grain's kicking the nail like that instead of allowing
through
it to go like that. So a screw might work better. This is the struggle. There you go. That caught.
There we go.
Didn't pop out.
Cool.
And those screws are deck screws, so that's not a structural screw. That's not really what's going to hold it, but that'll just
temporarily hold it.
Keep it put, and we'll just leave it in there. It'll do something.
Yep.
After getting one joist set at each end of the building, we set up a string line running across the ends of these joists, which we could use as reference when setting the rest of the joists. And we wanted the ends of the joist just touching the string here, as this would ensure the ends of each joist were all perfectly in line. One other thing we noticed at this point was that the end of this girder had a slight twist to it and wasn't perfectly plumb. To fix this, we attached a long board to the girder to give us some leverage, and were able to pull the girder into plumb before reattaching the joists. We set the rest of the 12-foot long joists at the other end of the building and then called it a day, since the lumber loading fiasco had set us back quite a bit. The next day, we got back to work and finished setting the rest of the joists in the center section of the house, and we were joined by two more members of the Perkins crew, Ray and Jason, who also have their own channel, the Ray J Builder Buddies. And it was pretty crazy how much faster things went with a few more sets of hands, and Ray and Jason got to work cutting the center joist to length while Eric and I set up another string line. The center joists are longer than the joists at each end of the building, and the overhang on the backside of the house creates a bump out, which provides more area in the kitchen and living area, and the overhang on the front will end up as a small deck, which will then transition to the paver patio area. And because part of these joists will be exposed as part of the deck at the front of the house, our architect called for pressure treated joists in this center section, but this ended up causing a few issues, which you'll see later. Anyway, after getting the joists in the center section set, we came back and added hurricane ties at each end of the joist where they met up with the girders. And these hurricane ties securely attach the floor system to the foundation and prevent the building from lifting during high winds or shifting during seismic activity. Also, you might notice that I'm just setting the ties in place with a pair of connector screws here, but we did come back and fill in all of the holes with either connector screws or joist nails before moving on. Next, we could add the rim joist to each end of the joist, and these are attached with 4 nails into each joist. When attaching the rim joist, one person would man the nail gun, while another one made sure the joist was square to the girder and raised or lowered the end of the board so the top edge was flush with each joist.
Up, 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 up. Use your muscles!
We could use a single board for the rim joist on each end section, but we had to use at least 2 boards on the center section since it's 24 feet long. And to make sure these boards were well attached, we added a piece of blocking behind where the 2 boards met up to give us plenty of material on which to nail the boards.
Oh, wow!
If the rim boards were going to break centered on a joist, we added more blocking material to either side of the end of the joist, again to provide more surface for nailing. We repeated the process on the rest of the rim joist sections, and then we needed to come back and add blocking where the floor joist in the center section transitioned from interior floor space to exterior deck. And this blocking needed to be added so that insulation could be added between the floor joists later, and it also helped to support the edges of the subfloor material in that area. The last step before adding the sheathing was to deal with some of the areas where the pressure-treated and non-pressure-treated joists were out of alignment due to the pressure-treated material just being slightly wider. In retrospect, I probably would have just opted to use pressure treated material for all of the joists so that they were closer to the same width, but these small strips we used as shim solved any of the issues we had here. With that, the floor framing was done, so we could move on to sheathing the floor, and I went with 3/4 inch thick Advantech subfloor panels here, and the folks at Huber Engineered Woods, who make Advantech as well as zip system products, were awesome enough to provide all of the floor, wall, and roof sheathing I needed for this project, so huge shout out to them.
Oh yeah, this is gonna be easy. Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Unfortunately, I didn't have a forklift on site to unload the material, so we had to unload about 100 sheets of sheathing by hand, and it was quite the workout unloading these and then moving them back to the site. Thankfully, my buddy Alex from the Single Track Sampler was around to help out, and the truck driver was even nice enough to lend a hand as well. Also, I've got to say, this was probably the coolest trailer setup I've ever seen, and this driver had some incredible control over his rig to get into our fairly tight part of the neighborhood. Anyway, back to sheathing, we started by snapping a chalk line about 1/2 inch in from the edge of the rim joist, and this gave us a good clean line where we could start all of our sheets. To install the Advantech, we first laid down a bead of this Advantech subfloor adhesive on the top edge of all the joists.
Whoa!
And adding this adhesive is a really important step as it'll help prevent squeaks in the subfloor later on. To attach the subfloor to the joist, we used 3-inch ring shank nails, which was total overkill, but will again ensure the subfloor doesn't lift and start squeaking in the future. And screws would have been even better here, but we were in a bit of a time crunch and it's hard to beat the speed of a framing nailer. Another cool feature of this Advantech subfloor is how dummy-proof it is to install with all of the information printed on the panels. The correct nailing pattern is printed right on the panel for 16-inch, 19.2 inch, and 24-inch on center joist spacing, and there's a reminder at each end of the panel to add an 1/8 inch gap for expansion. The first row of sheathing went down super quick since they were all full-length panels, but we needed to cross-cut a panel in half to start the next row so that the butt joints, where the ends of the two panels met, were staggered. And the track saw made quick work of this cut, and after cutting the panel, we could add more subfloor adhesive, also adding it to the groove this time. To help set the groove on the new panel onto the tongue on the previous row, we used a scrap piece of wood and a mini sledgehammer, and it's important to use some kind of scrap block here to prevent damaging the tongue. We continued on down the row, adding more panels until we got to another spot where the joist didn't quite line up, and once again we just cut a thin shim and applied the subfloor adhesive to both faces to make sure it was well secured. We repeated the whole process for a third row, which was another row of full panels, so it went super quick. The final row of sheathing to install was in the area where the backside of the house will bump out in that kitchen and living area, and I ripped the subfloor pieces to size for this final row, again using the track saw. Because there wasn't a groove on 2 of those ripped pieces, we needed to add blocking underneath the subfloor where those panels met up to help support those pieces. Once the blocking was added, we could attach the strips in the same way, and then we got the subfloor cleaned off so we could lay out where the walls would need to go. But we'll cover that in next week's video, which will be on wall framing and sheathing. After finishing the layout work, and since the delivery of the framing material hadn't quite arrived yet, we called it a wrap and had a little bit of fun christening the subfloor with my hoverboard.
Even in the boots. Wow, you're good. You're almost as good as my kids. Wow. Oh, wow.
Ray, you gonna try that thing?
Then you bust your head with the other.
There you go. All right. All right.
I see that cat like speed meat busting you go.
All right. So, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Just hop on.
There you go. Yeah, man. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, there you go. Look at you. No flailing. Oh, there we go.
Wow.
Jason's natural. Jason's.
Quits where I busted.
Natural. That's cool. It's christened.
Wow.
Whew, it's actively snowing, so I'm gonna make this quick. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay tuned for next week's video, which is gonna be on framing and sheathing all of the walls on the house. Also, I wanna say a huge shout out to all of my Patreon supporters and my YouTube members. You guys' support, it really means the world to me. If you wanna learn more about that, I'll have links to those somewhere on the screen and in the video description below. And last, if you're not already and you wanna stay tuned with this series, go ahead and get subscribed and ring that notification bell so you don't miss any of the future videos. All right, thanks for watching, y'all, and until next week, happy building.